Hello listeners, welcome back to Snippit Sports Science, sponsored by EliteForm.com. Welcome back to part 2 of the International Society of Sports Nutrition position stand on creatine supplementation. In part 1, we covered the metabolic role of creatine, as well as the supplemental protocols, bioavailability, prevalence of use in sport, and other applications in sport and training. In part 2, we will cover the potential medical uses of creatine, the safety, as well as the official positions of the ISSN. Now, of great interest to us are the brain and spinal cord neuroprotection, which I actually know quite a bit less about, so I'd love to hear some about that.
This is fascinating, especially a lot of attention's been given to contact sports with concussions and so forth. And as we know, that the risk of concussions in athletes involved in contact sports has really had a lot of public note at present. It's actually been known for a long time that creatine supplementation possesses neuroprotective benefits. For this reason, a number of studies have examined the effects of creatine supplementation in traumatic brain injury, cerebral ischemia, and spinal cord injury. It's hard to do these type of studies in humans, therefore a lot of the studies noted here in this review is the use of rats. For example, in one study, they studied the effects of 5 days of creatine administration prior to a controlled traumatic brain injury in rats and mice. The researchers found that creatine monohydrate decreased the extent of cortical damage by 36 to 50%. This protection appeared to be related to creatine-induced maintenance of neuronal mitochondrial biogenics. Therefore, the researchers concluded that creatine supplementation may be useful as a neuroprotective agent against acute and chronic neurodegenerative processes. In another study, they reported that in neonatal rats that were fed 3 grams per kilo of creatine for 3 days, they observed a significant increase in the ratio of brain phosphocreatine to inorganic phosphate and a 25% reduction in the volume of epidemic brain tissue following cerebral hypoxic ischemia. The authors concluded that creatine supplementation appears to improve brain biogenics, thereby helping minimize the impact of brain ischemia. And I know there's actually been a lot of anecdotal evidence in contact sports of rugby union and so forth who have used creatine and had that subjective report of improvement of recovery following concussions and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And it also just makes sense that upon impact, you'd be using that very rapid energy. And so with the eccentric attenuation of the impact from contact with another player, that your primary energy system in that situation would be using creatine phosphate.
With this review thus far, we've actually covered the role of creatine supplementation in the sporting type environment. It's really good to now note the potential medical uses of creatine. The first one we're actually going to talk about is creatine synthesis deficiencies.
Creatine deficiency syndromes are a group of inborn errors that reduce or eliminate the ability to endogenously synthesize or effect transcellular creatine transport. Individuals with creatine synthesis deficiencies have low levels of creatine and phosphocreatine in the muscle and the brain. As a result, they often have clinical manifestations of muscle myopathies, gyrate atrophy, movement disorders, speech delay, autism, mental retardation, epilepsy, and/or developmental problems. Some researchers evaluated the effects of creatine monohydrate supplementation at 0.3 to 0.8 grams per kilogram per day in 48 children with clinical manifestations of global development delay or intellectual disability with speech or language delay and behavioral problems, epilepsy, or movement disorder. The median age at treatment was 25.5 months, 39 months, and 11 years in patients with mild, moderate, and severe developmental delay or intellectual disability, respectively. The researchers found that creatine supplementation increased brain creatine levels and improved or stabilized clinical symptoms. Moreover, 4 patients treated younger than 9 months had normal or almost normal developmental outcomes. What can you tell us about neurodegenerative diseases, Chris?
The neuromuscular diseases talk about the muscular dystrophies, Huntington diseases, Parkinson's, mitochondrial-related diseases. In one study, results revealed no clinical benefits on patient outcomes with those with Parkinson's disease or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. However, there was some evidence in this study that creatine supplementation slowed down progression of brain atrophy in patients with Huntington's disease, although the clinical markers were ineffective. So whether creatine supplementation may have a role in mediating other clinical markers in these patient populations, or whether individual patients may respond more positively to creatine supplementation than others, this remains to be determined.
Moving into ischemic heart disease, creatine and phosphocreatine play an important role in maintaining myocardial bioenergetics during ischemic events. For this reason, there has been interest in assessing the role of creatine or phosphocreatine in reducing arrhythmias and/or improving heart function during ischemia. In a recent review, some researchers concluded that phosphocreatine administration, primarily as an addition to cardioplegic solutions, has been used to treat myocardial ischemia and prevent ischemia-induced arrhythmia and improve cardiac function with some success. They suggested that creatine supplementation may protect the heart during an ischemic event. Thus, prophylactic creatine supplementation may be beneficial for patients at risk of myocardial ischemia and/or stroke.
And this is starting to talk about the aging population, where there's a growing collection of evidence supporting the use of creatine supplementation may improve health status as individuals age. In this regard, creatine supplementation has been reported to help lower cholesterol and triglyceride levels, reduce fat accumulation in the liver, reduce homocysteine levels, serve as an antioxidant, enhance glycemic control, slow tumor growth in some types of cancers, increase strength or muscle mass, as we all know, minimize bone loss, improve functional capacities in patients with knee osteoarthritis and fibromyalgia. Our findings in one study suggested that creatine supplementation combined with an exercise program improves glycemic control and glucose disposal in type 2 diabetic patients. In another study, they reported that low-dose creatine, 0.1 of a gram per kilo per day, combined with protein supplementation, increased lean tissue mass and upper body strength while decreasing markers of muscle protein degradation and bone resorption in older men. Similarly, another study reported that 12 months of creatine supplementation during resistance training increased strength and preserved femoral neck bone mineral density and increased femoral shaft subarostal width in postmenopausal women. Finally, a number of studies have shown that creatine supplementation can increase brain creatine content generally by 5 to 15%. Moreover, creatine supplementation can reduce mental fatigue or improve cognitive function. For example, in one study, they reported that creatine supplementation of 8 grams per day for 5 days reduced mental fatigue when subjects repeatedly performed a simple mathematical calculation, as well as increased oxygen utilization in the brain. Since creatine uptake by the brain is slow and limited, current research is investigating whether the dietary supplementation of creatine precursors may promote greater increases in brain creatine. One recent study suggested that this increase in other supplementation increases brain creatine content by a greater degree than just creatine monohydrate alone.
In regards to pregnancy, since creatine supplementation has been shown to improve brain and heart bioenergetics during ischemic conditions and possesses neuroprotective properties, there has been recent interest in the use of creatine during pregnancy to promote neural development and reduce complications resulting from birth asphyxia. The rationale for creatine supplementation during pregnancy is that the fetus relies upon placental transfer of maternal creatine during late pregnancy, and significant changes in creatine synthesis and excretion occur as pregnancy progresses. Consequently, there is an increased demand for and utilization of creatine during pregnancy. Maternal creatine supplementation has been reported to improve neonatal survival and organ function following birth asphyxiation in animals. Human studies show changes in maternal urine and plasma creatine levels across pregnancy and association to maternal diet. Consequently, it has been postulated that there may be benefit to creatine supplementation during pregnancy on fetal growth, development, and health. This area of research may have broad implications for fetal and child development and health.
So this sounds quite theoretical.
Yeah, it's quite theoretical. It's very hard to do studies in pregnancy because of the potential harm to the pregnant woman or fetus.
Definitely. The last point in this review was just around safety. And the last point of the review is just around safety. The only consistently reported side effect from creatine supplementation that has been described in literature has been weight gain, which is a point that I brought up earlier. Unsubstantiated anecdotal claims, as well as rare cases of reports described in the literature without rigorous systematic causality assessments, have been refuted in numerous well-controlled clinical studies, showing that creatine supplementation does not increase the incidence of musculoskeletal injuries, dehydration, muscle cramping, or gastrointestinal upset. Nor has the literature provided any support that creatine promotes renal dysfunction or has long-term detrimental effects. The breadth and repetition of these findings provide compelling evidence that creatine monohydrate is well tolerated and is safe to consume in healthy, untrained, and trained individuals regardless of age. As noted earlier, the number of potential medical uses of creatine supplementation that can improve health and well-being as one ages may provide therapeutic benefit in clinical population ranging from infants to senior adults, This has continued to grow without identifying significant risks or adverse events even in these diseased or compromised special populations. Some critics of creatine supplementation have pointed to warnings listed on the product labels that individuals younger than 18 years of age should not take creatine as evidence that creatine supplementation is unsafe in younger populations. It's important to understand that this is a legal precaution and there's no scientific evidence that children or adolescents should not take creatine. And at no stage is this that Jared and I are either condoning it. It's something that has to be discussed between the user and also the parent guardian. As noted, a number of short and long-term studies using relatively high doses of creatine have been conducted in infants, toddlers, and adolescents with some health and or ergogenic benefits observed. These studies provided no evidence that the use of creatine at recommended doses pose a health risk to individuals less than 18 years of age. Creatine supplementation may improve training adaptations and reduce risk to injury, including younger athletes. For this reason, it was stated that creatine supplementation is an acceptable nutritional strategy for younger athletes who A. are involved in serious or competitive supervised training, B. are consuming a well-balanced and performance-enhancing diet, thirdly, are knowledgeable about appropriate use of creatine, and finally, do not exceed recommended dosages.
After reviewing the scientific and medical literature in this area, the International Society of Sports Nutrition concludes the following in terms of creatine supplementation. 1. Creatine monohydrate is the most effective ergogenic nutritional supplement. 2. Creatine monohydrate supplementation is not only safe, but has been reported to have a number of therapeutic benefits in healthy and diseased populations. 3. If proper precautions and supervision are provided, creatine monohydrate supplementation in children and adolescent athletes is acceptable and may provide a nutritional alternative with a favorable safety profile to potentially dangerous anabolic androgenic drugs. 4. Label advisories on creatine products that caution against usage by those under 18 years old, while perhaps intended to insulate their manufacturers from legal liability, are likely unnecessary given the science supporting creatine safety, including in children and adolescents. 5. At present, creatine monohydrate is the most extensively studied and clinically effective form of creatine. 6. The addition of carbohydrate or carbohydrate and protein to a creatine supplement appears to increase muscular uptake of creatine. 7. The quickest method of increasing muscle creatine stores may be to consume 0.3 grams per kilogram per day of creatine monohydrate for 5 to 7 days, followed by 3 to 5 grams per day thereafter to maintain elevated stores. Initially, ingesting smaller amounts of creatine monohydrate, such as 3 to 5 grams per day, will increase muscle creatine stores over a 3 to 4 week period. However, the initial performance effects of this method of supplementation are less supported. 8. Clinical populations have been supplemented with high levels of creatine monohydrate, up to 0.8 grams per kilogram per day, equivalent to 56 grams per day for a 70 kilogram individual, for years with no clinically significant or serious adverse effects. 9. Further research is warranted to examine the potential medical benefits of creatine monohydrate and precursors like guanidinoacetic acid on sport, health, and medicine.
In conclusion, get on it. In conclusion, they actually put a nice little paragraph together, but I'm going to be honest, I think we've really covered it quite comprehensively here. A great review for anyone wanting to know about creatine and its supplementation, its use. It appears safe. It has use across a spectrum of users from young to old in acute but also longitudinal type usage. And I've just finished a gym session. I feel like I've just missed out on its potential benefits. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, everyone should be on it. It has extensive benefits, great safety. The only thing to do is to take it.
But creatine monohydrate, don't get confused with all the different hype behind marketing and so forth.
All right, thank you, Chris. And that concludes part 2 of the creatine supplementation position stand by the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Thank you, listeners. Please visit our website or social media at Snippit Science. That's SNIPPIT Science. All of our social media have the same handle. And please visit our sponsor at eliteform.com. Thank you.